The merciless desert sun beat down on the excavation site near Qumran, its rays creating shimmering mirages that danced across the ancient landscape of the Judean wilderness. Dr. Sarah Goldstein had been working in this unforgiving terrain for over 3 months, leading a team of 12 international researchers in what had initially been planned as a routine archaeological survey. The Dead Sea region, famous for yielding the Dead Sea Scrolls decades earlier, continued to surrender its secrets reluctantly, one pottery fragment at a time. Sarah wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her dusty glove, leaving a streak of dirt across her forehead. At 42, she was considered one of the world's leading experts in Near Eastern archaeology, with a particular specialization in Second Temple period Judaism. Her weathered hands spoke of decades spent carefully brushing soil from ancient artifacts, and her sharp green eyes had learned to spot the extraordinary among the mundane. The excavation site itself was a marvel of organized chaos. Canvas tarps provided minimal shade over various dig squares, each meticulously mapped and photographed. Graduate students and volunteer diggers worked with the methodical patience that archaeology demanded, their tools ranging from heavy pickaxes to delicate dental instruments for the most fragile finds. The constant sound of brushes against stone created a rhythm that had become as familiar as breathing to the team. "Professor Goldstein!" The urgent call cut through the late afternoon air like a blade. David Rosen, her most promising graduate student, stood about 50 meters away near the newest excavation square. His usually calm demeanor was replaced by barely contained excitement, and his voice carried across the site with an intensity that made every worker stop and look up. Sarah made her way across the rocky terrain, her hiking boots navigating the treacherous combination of loose stones and ancient pottery shards that littered the ground. The Judean hills stretched endlessly in every direction, their barren beauty holding secrets that had waited millennia to be discovered. As she approached David's position, she could see that his hands were actually trembling with excitement. "We found it about 2 hours ago," David explained in rapid Hebrew, his accent thick with emotion and adrenaline. "I wanted to be absolutely certain before calling you over. Professor, the symbols carved into this entrance, they're not like anything in our databases. They predate known Aramaic inscriptions by centuries, possibly millennia." Sarah knelt beside the partially exposed stone chamber, her trained eye immediately recognizing that this was no ordinary find. The entrance had been carefully carved from the living rock of the hillside, and the symbols that adorned its archway were unlike anything she had encountered in her 20-year career. They seemed to pulse with an inner life, each character flowing into the next in a script that appeared both ancient beyond measure and somehow eerily familiar. The symbols themselves defied easy categorization. They bore similarities to Proto-Hebrew, but with flourishes and additional characters that suggested a completely different linguistic tradition. Some resembled Egyptian hieroglyphics, others recalled Sumerian cuneiform. But the overall effect was of a writing system that predated all known scripts. At the center of the stone archway, one symbol commanded particular attention. It depicted a humanoid figure with what appeared to be folded wings, holding a sword pointed downward in what could have been either a gesture of peace or preparation for battle. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Whoever had carved this symbol possessed artistic skills that rivaled the greatest sculptors of antiquity. "Have you contacted the Israel Antiquities Authority yet?" Sarah asked, though even as she spoke, her academic curiosity was already overriding standard archaeological protocol. "Not yet," David replied, understanding his mentor's passion for discovery. "I thought you should be the first to see this. Professor, there's more. We've used ground-penetrating radar, and the chamber extends much deeper into the hillside than we initially thought. This isn't just a burial cave, it's a complex of interconnected rooms." As they carefully worked to enlarge the opening, using brushes and small tools to avoid damaging any inscriptions, the true scope of their discovery began to reveal itself. The chamber stretched back into darkness, its walls lined with carved niches that held ancient clay vessels. The air that escaped from the opening carried a strange scent, not the mustiness typically associated with ancient sealed spaces, but something almost floral, as if flowers had been preserved in the dry desert air for thousands of years. Sarah's headlamp illuminated the interior as she crawled through the enlarged opening, David following close behind. The chamber was far larger than anything they had expected to find in this region. The ceiling soared to nearly 3 meters in height, and the walls were covered in more of the mysterious script. But it was what occupied the center of the chamber that truly took their breath away. A wooden chest, remarkably preserved by the arid desert conditions, sat on a raised stone platform. The wood appeared to be cedar, and it was adorned with inlays of what looked like precious metals, gold and silver that gleamed in their lamplight as if they had been polished yesterday. The preservation was so perfect that it seemed almost supernatural. "My God," Sarah whispered, her voice echoing softly in the chamber. "David, we need to document everything before we even think about opening that chest. This could be the find of the century." They spent the next 3 hours photographing every angle, every symbol, every detail of the chamber. Sarah's scientific training warred with her excitement as she forced herself to follow proper archaeological procedures. Each photograph was carefully catalogued, each measurement precisely recorded. The symbols on the walls seemed to tell a story, with recurring motifs of winged figures engaged in what appeared to be both warfare and more intimate interactions. When they finally approached the chest, Sarah's hands were shaking with anticipation. The lid was secured with a mechanism unlike anything she had seen in ancient craftsmanship, a series of interlocking symbols that seemed to require specific positioning to open. As she worked with the delicate mechanism, she couldn't shake the feeling that the symbols were somehow familiar, as if she had seen them in dreams. The lid opened with a soft sigh, as if the chest had been holding its breath for millennia. Inside, wrapped in what appeared to be silk that had somehow survived the passage of time without decay, lay a collection of scrolls unlike anything in any museum or private collection. The silk itself was a marvel. It should have crumbled to dust long ago, yet it remained supple and lustrous. The scrolls were written on a material that appeared to be neither papyrus nor parchment, but something else entirely, something that seemed to glow with its own inner light. The writing was in the same mysterious script they had found on the walls, but scattered throughout were detailed illustrations that made Sarah's heart race with their implications. The drawings depicted figures with wings engaged in what appeared to be both celestial warfare and intensely personal, intimate moments. The artistry was breathtaking. Whoever had created these illustrations possessed skills that surpassed anything from the ancient world. The figures themselves were rendered with such detail and emotion that they seemed almost alive, their expressions conveying depths of feeling that transcended the limitations of their medium. "Professor," David whispered, pointing to one particular illustration that showed 2 winged figures in an embrace that radiated tenderness and longing. "These aren't just religious texts, are they? They're telling a story, a very personal story." Sarah nodded, her mind racing with the implications. "David, we need to get these to the lab immediately. And not a word to anyone about what we've found here until we understand exactly what we're dealing with. Something tells me we've stumbled onto secrets that people have died to protect." As they carefully packed the scrolls into specially designed containers, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the ridge above their excavation site. The man stood perfectly still against the darkening sky, his dark suit incongruous in the desert landscape. He had been tracking their excavation for weeks, waiting patiently for exactly this moment. Through high-powered binoculars, he watched as they sealed the chamber and prepared to transport their find back to Jerusalem. His face showed no emotion, but his fingers moved quickly across the screen of a satellite phone, sending encrypted messages to contacts around the world. The ancient secrets of the warrior who would become known as the Archangel Michael were about to surface after millennia of careful concealment. And there were forces, both earthly and celestial, that had spent thousands of years ensuring they remained buried. As Sarah and David made their way back to their vehicles, the first stars were beginning to appear in the desert sky. Neither of them could have imagined that their discovery would soon attract the attention of secret organizations, Vatican scholars, and beings whose existence challenged everything humanity thought it knew about the nature of love, duty, and the divine. The mystery of Michael's past was beginning to unfold, and the world would never be the same. 5 weeks after the discovery at Qumran, Dr. Sarah Goldstein found herself working 18-hour days in the secure basement laboratory of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. The scrolls had been carefully preserved using the most advanced conservation techniques available and were now subjected to every form of scientific analysis known to modern archaeology. Carbon dating, spectrographic analysis, and digital imaging had all been employed, yet the results only deepened the mystery surrounding their find. The laboratory itself was a monument to modern archaeological science. Climate-controlled cases housed the scrolls at precise temperature and humidity levels, while high-resolution scanners captured every detail of the ancient texts in multiple spectrums of light. Computer monitors displayed enlarged images of the mysterious script, allowing for detailed analysis of each character and symbol. Sarah had assembled a small but exceptionally qualified team to help with the translation work. Dr. Miriam Cohen, a professor of ancient linguistics at the University of Tel Aviv, was widely regarded as one of the world's foremost experts in dead languages. Her office walls were covered with charts showing the evolution of various ancient scripts, and her ability to identify linguistic patterns had led to breakthrough translations of previously indecipherable texts. The third member of their core team was perhaps the most unexpected: Father Alessandro Romano, a Vatican scholar who had arrived in Jerusalem on what he described as a temporary research assignment. In his mid-50s, with graying hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge accumulated over decades of study, Father Romano specialized in apocryphal texts, religious writings that had been excluded from official church doctrine for various reasons. "The linguistic structure continues to fascinate me," Dr. Cohen remarked, adjusting her glasses as she peered at high-resolution scans displayed on multiple monitors. "The syntax appears to be a precursor to Hebrew, but it incorporates grammatical elements I've never encountered in any Semitic language. It's almost as if it were designed for beings who thought in fundamentally different patterns than humans." Father Romano nodded thoughtfully, his fingers tracing patterns in the air as he followed the flow of the ancient script. The Vatican secret archives contain references to texts like these, writings that were deliberately excluded from the canonical scriptures, not because of doctrinal disputes, but because they contained information about the celestial hierarchy that was deemed too sensitive for general knowledge. David, who had become the team's expert on the technological analysis of the scrolls, looked up from his computer workstation. The material composition of these scrolls continues to defy classification. The substrate isn't papyrus, parchment, or any known organic material. Spectrographic analysis suggests it contains elements that shouldn't exist in nature, at least not on Earth. Sarah paused in her translation work, her eyes red from strain and lack of sleep. She had been pushing herself relentlessly, driven by an inexplicable sense of urgency that she couldn't quite explain. According to what I've been able to piece together so far, these texts tell the story of a being called Mikael, which we recognize as meaning, "who is like God." But these writings describe him before his elevation to the status of Archangel, before he became known as the commander of heaven's armies. "What kind of story are they telling?" David asked, leaning forward with intense curiosity. Sarah hesitated, glancing at Father Romano, whose expression had grown increasingly grave as their translation work progressed. "It's a love story, a forbidden one. And if these texts are authentic, it completely rewrites everything we thought we knew about the nature of angels and their capacity for personal relationships." The priest stood and began pacing the small laboratory, his movements betraying an inner turmoil that his calm voice didn't reveal. "Please, continue. The Church has long debated the emotional and spiritual nature of angels. These texts might provide insights that have been lost for millennia." Sarah returned to her translation, her voice growing quieter as she read the ancient words. The texts describe Mikael as a warrior angel, specifically assigned to protect the boundaries between the celestial and earthly realms. His duties required him to patrol the liminal spaces where heaven and earth intersected, ensuring that the separation between the divine and mortal worlds remained intact. Dr. Cohen had been working on a parallel section of text, and her discovery added another layer to the emerging narrative. Here we have descriptions of another being, one called Seraphiel. The text describes this angel as belonging to a different order entirely, one whose duties involved inspiring human creativity, artistic expression, and the capacity for love. Father Romano stopped pacing abruptly. "Seraphiel? I've seen that name in Vatican archives, but only in the most restricted texts. The references describe this being as one of the most powerful of the seraphim, responsible for maintaining the divine spark of creativity in human souls. Sarah continued translating, her voice filled with wonder at the story that was emerging. During the course of his duties patrolling the boundaries, Mikael encounters Seraphiel. The initial meetings are described as accidental. Two angels whose responsibilities occasionally brought them to the same liminal spaces. But what began as chance encounters evolved into something much deeper. The temperature in the laboratory seemed to drop slightly as Sarah read the next passage. In the silent watches between dawn and dusk, when neither heaven nor earth bore witness to their meetings, Mikael discovered in Seraphiel what his warrior heart had never known, a peace that made even the songs of the morning stars seem discordant by comparison. In Seraphiel's presence, the eternal vigilance that defined his existence gave way to something he had no words to describe. Dr. Cohen found a complementary passage that described the relationship from Seraphiel's perspective. The great warrior, whose strength could shatter mountains and whose sword could cleave the fabric of reality itself, became gentle as a whisper when they walked together in the spaces between worlds. Seraphiel found in Mikael not just a protector, but a soul whose dedication to duty was matched only by a capacity for love that had remained hidden even from himself. Father Romano's theological training warred with the implications of what they were reading. Traditional Christian angelology holds that angels are spiritual beings without physical bodies, incapable of the kinds of personal relationships described in human terms. But these texts suggest something radically different, that at least some angels possess the full range of emotional and spiritual capacities, including the ability to form deep, personal bonds. David, ever the pragmatist, raised a crucial question. But if this is true, if angels are capable of love in this sense, why has this knowledge been suppressed? What would be so dangerous about this information that it would need to be hidden for thousands of years? As if summoned by his question, the lights in the laboratory suddenly flickered, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Through the small basement window they could see a black sedan parked across the street, the same vehicle that had been appearing near the university with increasing frequency over the past 2 weeks. Sarah walked to the window, her scientific skepticism warring with a growing sense of unease. The figure standing beside the car was the same man they had glimpsed at the excavation site, tall, dressed in an expensive dark suit that seemed inappropriate for Jerusalem's climate, with an ageless quality that made it difficult to estimate his age. "We're definitely being watched," she murmured to the others, "and whoever they are, they're not trying very hard to remain hidden." Father Romano joined her at the window, his expression troubled. "There are forces, both earthly and otherwise, that have maintained the secrecy surrounding these kinds of revelations for millennia. If this story is genuine, if Michael experienced this kind of forbidden love, it has implications that extend far beyond academic interest." Dr. Cohen continued translating while the others discussed their situation. Their love became the light that guided them through the darkest periods of cosmic uncertainty. When chaos threatened the boundaries between worlds, their combined strength proved greater than either could achieve alone. But such radiant joy could not remain hidden from the all-seeing eyes of the Celestial Council forever. As if responding to the words being spoken, the scrolls themselves began to emit a faint golden glow that had nothing to do with the laboratory's lighting. The phenomenon was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but it grew stronger as they continued their translation work. David immediately began recording the phenomenon with every instrument available. "The electromagnetic readings are spiking. Whatever's causing this luminescence, it's not any kind of phosphorescence or chemical reaction I've ever seen." That night, as they secured their work and prepared to leave the laboratory, each member of the team was acutely aware that they were no longer merely engaged in academic research. They were uncovering secrets that had been deliberately buried, and their discovery was attracting attention from entities whose motivations remained entirely unclear. Sarah made copies of their translation work and stored them in multiple secure locations. Father Romano sent encrypted communications to contacts within the Vatican, seeking guidance on how to proceed. Dr. Cohen began researching historical references to similar suppressed texts, looking for patterns that might help them understand what they were dealing with. None of them noticed the second figure that had begun watching the laboratory, a woman dressed in white who seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, whose presence caused sensitive individuals to pause and look around with inexplicable feelings of recognition and longing. The secrets of Michael's past were calling to those who had lived them, and the modern world was about to discover that some mysteries possess the power to bridge the gap between ancient history and present reality. In the depths of the Vatican secret archives, 3 levels below the Apostolic Palace, Father Alessandro Romano worked by the light of specially designed lamps that wouldn't damage the ancient manuscripts surrounding him. The archives themselves were a marvel of preservation technology housed within medieval stone walls, climate-controlled chambers that maintained perfect conditions for documents spanning 2 millennia of church history. Romano had spent his entire adult life studying the texts that the church had deemed too sensitive for public consumption. His security clearance allowed him access to materials that fewer than 20 people in the world were permitted to see, including documents that predated Christianity itself and contained knowledge that could reshape humanity's understanding of its relationship with the divine. The section where he now worked was known only as Archive X, a collection of texts that dealt with pre-incarnation celestial events. These documents had been gathered over centuries from locations across the ancient world, preserved not for study, but for containment. The Church's position had long been that certain knowledge was too dangerous for human comprehension and should be safeguarded rather than shared. Romano's hands trembled as he cross-referenced the Qumran scrolls with manuscripts that hadn't been examined by outside scholars in over 400 years. What he discovered made him question everything he thought he understood about the nature of divine love and celestial hierarchy. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, Sarah's team had achieved a breakthrough in translation that would fundamentally alter their understanding of angelic nature and the price of divine duty. The laboratory had become their second home over the past month. Dr. Cohen had established a systematic approach to translating the mysterious script, creating comprehensive databases of recurring symbols and grammatical structures. Her linguistic analysis had revealed that the language possessed a sophistication that surpassed any known ancient writing system, with subtle variations in symbol structure that conveyed emotional nuances impossible in human languages. "Listen to this passage, Dr. O." Cohen read aloud, her voice filled with wonder and growing trepidation. "The level of detail is extraordinary. It's as if we're reading someone's personal diary rather than a religious text." She began translating from a section they had designated as Scroll 7. In the 3rd watch of the eternal day, when Michael completed his prescribed circuit of the boundary realms, he would journey to the grove that exists between worlds, neither in heaven nor on earth, but in the space where love creates its own reality. There, Seraphiel would be waiting, wings folded in meditation, surrounded by flowers that bloomed in colors for which human language has no names. David looked up from his computer analysis, where he had been working on correlating the astronomical references scattered throughout the texts. "The precision of these celestial descriptions is incredible. I've been running the stellar alignments mentioned in the scrolls through advanced astronomical software, and they correspond to actual configurations that occurred approximately 6,000 years ago. The level of astronomical knowledge required to record these details suggests either advanced ancient science or something else entirely." Sarah had been working on what appeared to be the most personal section of the texts, and her translations were revealing a love story of cosmic proportions. Seraphiel's wings carried within them the colors of dawn, deep gold that held the warmth of the first light, rose that captured the blush of morning clouds, and the profound blue of night giving way to day. When these wings enfolded Michael, the eternal warrior forgot the weight of his sword, the burden of constant vigilance, the loneliness that came with bearing responsibility for the safety of all creation. The emotional intimacy described in the text was unlike anything found in traditional religious literature. These weren't abstract theological concepts, but deeply personal experiences described with the kind of detail that could only come from direct memory. Sarah continued. In Seraphiel's embrace, Michael discovered that love was not the weakness he had been taught to guard against, but rather the greatest power in all of creation, a force that could heal wounds that duty had inflicted, restore joy to hearts that service had emptied, and transform the act of protection from obligation into celebration. Dr. Cohen had found parallel passages that described their meetings from Seraphiel's perspective. The great commander, whose very presence could calm cosmic storms, and whose authority extended across the boundaries of existence, became tender as starlight when they walked together through gardens that existed solely for their love. In those sacred hours, Seraphiel witnessed the true heart of the warrior, not the fearsome enforcer of divine will, but a soul whose capacity for love matched his legendary strength. The implications were staggering. If these texts were authentic, they suggested that the greatest warrior in celestial history had experienced a love so profound that it had become the defining experience of his existence, even while remaining hidden from the official chronicles of heaven. Father Romano's voice crackled over the secure satellite phone connection from the Vatican. I found corroborating evidence in the archives here, documents that have been sealed for over a millennium. The story you're uncovering isn't just authentic, it's been actively suppressed by successive church administrations who believe that knowledge of angelic romantic love would fundamentally destabilize human religious understanding. He had spread out photocopies of illuminated manuscripts on his work table, some dating back to the earliest centuries of Christianity. These Vatican texts describe what happened when the Celestial Council discovered the relationship between Michael and Seraphiel. The discovery created what the documents call the first great crisis of heavenly authority, a situation that threatened the fundamental order of creation itself. Sarah's heart began to sink as she anticipated the tragedy that seemed inevitable in any story of forbidden love. What was the council's decision? Romano's voice carried the weight of millennia of sorrow. According to these Vatican documents, Michael was presented with an ultimatum that would test the very foundations of his character. He could renounce his love for Seraphiel and accept elevation to the status of Archangel, becoming the supreme commander of all celestial armies, or face exile from heaven alongside the one he loved. The laboratory fell silent as the team absorbed the impossible nature of the choice that had been forced upon Michael. To choose love would mean abandoning his responsibilities to all of creation. To choose duty would mean sacrificing the one relationship that had given his existence meaning. The theological implications are staggering. Romano continued from Rome. If Michael chose duty over love, it would mean that the greatest act of service in celestial history was also the greatest act of personal sacrifice. But if he chose love, it would suggest that even the highest angels place personal happiness above cosmic responsibility. Dr. Cohen found the passage that revealed Michael's decision. With wings that trembled like leaves in an autumn storm, Michael made the choice that would define not only his own existence but the nature of divine service itself. He accepted the promotion to Archangel and Supreme Commander of the heavenly host, knowing that the price would be more devastating than any wound he had ever received in battle. But what happened to Seraphiel? David asked, dreading the answer. Father Romano's voice became barely audible. According to the Vatican texts, Seraphiel wasn't simply exiled or destroyed. The punishment was far more absolute, complete erasure, not just death but removal from existence itself, from memory, from history, from the very fabric of creation, as if Seraphiel had never been. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the laboratory's temperature. But if Seraphiel was erased from existence, how do these scrolls exist? How can we be reading about someone who was supposedly removed from reality itself? The answer came to her even as she spoke the question, and the realization filled her with both awe and heartbreak. Michael wrote these scrolls himself. These aren't just historical documents, they're love letters. Michael wrote them as the only way to preserve Seraphiel's memory, the only way to maintain proof that their love had existed. Dr. Cohen's voice was thick with emotion as she translated what was clearly the most personal passage in all the scrolls. I have been granted dominion over the hosts of heaven, praised as the mightiest warrior in all creation, called the right hand of the divine will. My name is spoken with reverence in every corner of existence, my battles celebrated in songs that will echo until the end of time. Yet in the silence between sword strokes, in the pause between commands, in the dark hours when even angels must rest, I remember wings that carried the colors of dawn, and I know that I am the loneliest being in all of existence. The golden glow emanating from the scrolls intensified as they read Michael's testament of loss, and the temperature in the laboratory began to drop noticeably. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Jerusalem with unnatural speed, their formation defying every meteorological prediction. David's instruments registered increasing electromagnetic anomalies. Whatever's happening to these scrolls, it's accelerating. The energy readings are off the charts. Father Romano's final communication from the Vatican carried an urgent warning. Alessandro speaking. I've discovered references to something called the Protocols of Remembrance in the most restricted archives. According to these texts, certain acts of memory and belief can resurrect what was thought to be permanently lost. If enough people read Michael's testimony, if they truly believe in the love he described. The connection cut off abruptly, leaving the laboratory in an increasingly supernatural atmosphere. The scrolls now pulsed with golden light, and the ancient symbols seemed to move and shift on the parchment as if responding to being read and believed. None of them noticed that the woman in white had entered the building, moving through corridors without triggering security systems. Her form became more solid with each step, as if the revelation of the scrolls was allowing her to return from the void of non-existence. Some loves they were about to discover are too powerful to be erased forever. The transformation in the laboratory was undeniable and increasingly dramatic. The temperature had plummeted to near freezing, causing their breath to form visible clouds in the air. Frost began forming on the metal surfaces of their equipment, and the golden light emanating from the scrolls now pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. Dr. Sarah Goldstein tried to maintain her scientific composure, but even her rigorous academic training couldn't provide a rational explanation for what was occurring. "The electromagnetic readings are completely off the charts," she announced, studying the displays on David's monitoring equipment. "Whatever energy these scrolls are generating, it's unlike anything in our understanding of physics." David Rosen, whose graduate work had focused on the intersection of archaeology and advanced physics, was documenting everything with multiple cameras and sensors. "Professor, the energy signature is consistent across all our instruments. This isn't equipment malfunction. It's as if the scrolls themselves are responding to our translation work, becoming more active as we uncover their contents." Dr. Miriam Cohen, despite her decades of experience with ancient languages, found herself compelled to continue translating by forces that seemed beyond mere academic curiosity. "There's something about these texts," she murmured, her fingers tracing the glowing symbols. "It's as if they're drawing me to read them, as if the act of translation is activating something that's been dormant for millennia." She returned to her work with a passage that seemed to burn brighter than the rest. "I write these words with borrowed starlight, stealing moments between my duties to record what the Celestial Council would have forgotten. Each symbol is inscribed with tears that freeze before they can fall, each word chosen from a vocabulary of longing that has no equal in any language of heaven or earth." The laboratory door's security system suddenly activated without any human input, engaging locks that hadn't been programmed for automatic operation. The climate control system began producing sounds like whispers, and shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move independently of any light source. "I know that even memory can be a form of resurrection," Cohen continued translating, her voice becoming stronger despite her growing unease. "If love is truly eternal, then somewhere in the vast reaches of creation, Seraphiel exists still, not destroyed but dispersed, waiting for remembrance to gather the scattered elements of existence and call them home." At that precise moment, the laboratory door burst open with such force that it bent on its hinges. 3 figures entered with an authority that seemed to bend reality around them. They wore identical dark suits that appeared expensive beyond human manufacture, and their faces carried an ageless quality that made it impossible to estimate their true age. Their eyes held depths that seemed older than human civilization. Dr. Goldstein, the lead figure, spoke in perfect, unaccented English that somehow conveyed multiple languages simultaneously. "You and your team are in possession of materials that were never intended for mortal comprehension. Return them to our custody immediately, and no harm will come to any of you." Sarah stepped protectively in front of the scrolls, her scientific integrity overriding her growing fear. "Who are you? By what authority do you make these demands? These are legitimate archaeological finds discovered on Israeli soil through properly authorized excavation." "We are the guardians of the threshold," the figure replied, and as he spoke, the temperature dropped even further. "We have maintained the barriers between revelation and mystery for longer than your species has possessed written language. Some truths are too dangerous for your world to bear. They would shatter the foundations upon which human civilization has been built." Father Romano had finally managed to re-establish communication from the Vatican, his voice crackling through the satellite connection with urgency. Sarah, I've discovered the identity of your visitors. They're mentioned in our most restricted archives, beings tasked with maintaining cosmic stability by controlling access to certain knowledge. They've been operating on Earth for thousands of years. The lead guardian's expression softened slightly, with what might have been respect for the priest's knowledge. Father Romano, your church exists in its current form precisely because certain revelations have been carefully managed throughout history. The story of Michael's sacrifice, of Seraphiel's erasure, would fundamentally destabilize every major religion on Earth. Billions of faithful would lose their anchor points of belief. Dr. Cohen, compelled by forces beyond her understanding, continued translating despite the supernatural confrontation occurring around her. If someday these words are discovered, if some brave souls dare to remember what powerful forces have worked to forget, know that love is the one force in all creation that can resurrect even the impossible. In writing this testament, I do not merely record our history. I plant seeds of hope that what was erased might someday bloom again in the garden of memory. But it's the truth, Sarah protested, her voice echoing with moral conviction. Regardless of the implications, people have a right to know authentic history. Truth, the guardian replied with what sounded like genuine sadness, is not always what mortal minds need for stability and happiness. Michael chose duty over love specifically to preserve the order that allows your civilization to function. That sacrifice must be honored by maintaining the secret he died to protect. As the confrontation intensified, the golden light from the scrolls became so bright that it began casting shadows throughout the laboratory. The ancient symbols seemed to lift off the parchment and dance in the air, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly but filled observers with inexplicable emotions of love and loss. Suddenly, in the corner of the laboratory, a figure began to materialize. At first, it was merely a shimmering distortion in the air, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. But as the guardians and researchers watched in stunned silence, the distortion gained substance and form. The woman who emerged was beautiful beyond human description, with wings that indeed carried the colors of dawn as the scrolls had described. Her presence filled the laboratory with warmth that countered the supernatural cold, and her eyes held the accumulated sorrow and joy of millennia. Seraphiel, Father Romano breathed in recognition over the communication system, his theological training allowing him to identify what others could only sense. The guardian leaders stepped back in shock, their composure cracking for the first time. This is impossible. You were erased from existence itself. The protocols were followed precisely. You cannot be here. Seraphiel's voice when she spoke was like music composed of light and longing, carrying harmonies that human ears had never heard. Love cannot be truly erased from creation. It can only be forgotten. And now that Michael's testament has been read, remembered, believed in by hearts brave enough to accept its truth, I am recalled from the void where erasure banished me. Dr. Cohen, tears streaming down her face, read the final passage of Michael's love letter. The greatest secret that the powers of creation would hide is this: love is stronger than law, more enduring than duty, more powerful than the decrees of any council. What love has joined, not even divine erasure can permanently separate. If these words ever find readers who believe in the truth they contain, let that belief serve as a bridge between what was lost and what might yet be restored. The temperature in the laboratory continued to fluctuate wildly, as reality itself seemed to bend around Seraphiel's return. The guardians formed a protective circle, their expressions torn between duty and wonder at witnessing an impossibility made manifest. Your return violates the fundamental order of creation, the lead guardian declared, but his voice carried doubt rather than authority. The decision of the Celestial Council cannot be overturned by mortal belief. My return, Seraphiel replied, her form becoming more solid with each word spoken, proves that love is a force more fundamental than any order, any law, any decree. Michael knew this truth when he wrote these scrolls. He sacrificed our present for the possibility of our future, trusting that eventually, somewhere, somewhen, hearts would be found brave enough to believe in love's power to resurrect the impossible. Outside the laboratory, the storm over Jerusalem intensified beyond anything in meteorological records. Lightning flashed in patterns that formed symbols similar to those on the scrolls, and witnesses across the city would later report seeing strange lights dancing in the clouds, as if heaven itself was preparing for a reunion that had been 6,000 years in the making. But even as Seraphiel's return seemed assured, the most powerful guardian of all had yet to make his appearance. The night was far from over, and the forces that had maintained cosmic order for millennia were not prepared to yield without a final confrontation that would determine the ultimate fate of love and duty in the celestial realm. David's instruments registered energy spikes that threatened to overload every system in the laboratory. "Professor, whatever's happening here is building towards something massive. The readings suggest we're at the epicenter of an event that could affect reality on a cosmic scale. None of them could have imagined that they were about to witness the return of the greatest warrior in celestial history, and that their small laboratory in Jerusalem was about to become the stage for a confrontation that would reshape the relationship between love and duty throughout all creation." The walls of the laboratory began to shimmer and fade, replaced by a reality that transcended physical space and time. The small basement room expanded impossibly, becoming a vast grove that existed in the liminal space between dimensions, the same sacred place that the scrolls had described as the meeting ground for Michael and Seraphiel's ancient love. Ancient trees with silver leaves that sang in harmonious whispers towered overhead, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that filtered light from stars that belonged to no earthly constellation. The ground beneath their feet felt like walking on crystallized music, each step producing soft chimes that resonated with cosmic frequencies. Flowers bloomed in colors that human languages had no names for, their fragrances carrying memories of every love that had ever existed. The research team found themselves standing as witnesses to a confrontation that would reshape the fundamental nature of love, duty, and divine will throughout all creation. The Guardians maintained their protective formation, but even these ancient beings seemed awed by the impossible resurrection they were witnessing. Seraphiel stood in the center of the grove, her wings now fully manifested and pulsing with the colors of eternal dawn. The aurora-like patterns that flowed across her feathers seemed to contain the essence of every sunrise that had ever blessed any world, and her presence filled the space with a warmth that healed wounds the observers hadn't realized they carried. "Michael," she whispered, her voice carrying across dimensions. "I have waited in the void beyond existence, sustained only by the memory of love and the faith that your words would someday find hearts brave enough to believe." Then, with a sound like thunder harmonized with the ringing of every bell that had ever called souls to worship, he appeared. Michael the Archangel, commander of heaven's armies, descended through the silver branches of the impossible trees. His massive wings cast shadows that contained the memory of every battle he had fought, every duty he had fulfilled, every soul he had protected during his millennia of service. His armor gleamed with light that seemed forged from the first stars of creation, and his legendary sword, the blade that had cast down Lucifer himself and defended the throne of the divine, hung at his side, humming with contained power. But it was his eyes that revealed the true scope of his sacrifice. They held 6,000 years of loneliness, countless battles fought without the comfort of love, endless nights of duty performed while carrying the secret knowledge of what he had given up for the sake of cosmic order. "Seraphiel," he whispered, and that single word contained such profound longing that Sarah felt her heart break for beings she had thought incapable of such deeply human emotions. "My beloved warrior," Seraphiel replied, taking a step toward him, her movement causing flowers to bloom in her footsteps. The lead guardian moved to intercede, his duty warring with the obvious rightness of what they were witnessing. This reunion cannot be permitted. The fundamental order of creation was established through Michael's sacrifice. To undo that choice now would unravel the cosmic stability that has been maintained for 6 millennia. "The order of creation," Michael replied, his voice carrying the authority accumulated through eons of absolute service, "was indeed built on sacrifice, my sacrifice. But perhaps," he looked at the scrolls, still glowing with golden light in Sarah's trembling hands, "perhaps some sacrifices were meant to be temporary, tests of devotion, rather than permanent punishments." Father Romano, his voice filled with theological wonder, spoke from the Vatican connection that somehow still functioned in this transcendent space. "In Christian doctrine, we teach that love is the highest virtue, that God is love itself. If that teaching has any truth, then perhaps the greatest act of worship is not the abandonment of love, but its perfect expression. Dr. E.U. Cohen, emboldened by witnessing the impossible made manifest, asked the question that burned in all their hearts. Will you choose love this time? Will you choose differently? Michael's expression showed the weight of a decision that could reshape reality itself. For 6,000 years he had served without question, fought without hesitation, led the armies of heaven with unwavering dedication. But in every moment of silence between duties, in every pause between battles, he had wondered about the path not taken. For 6 millennia, he said slowly, each word carrying the weight of cosmic significance, I have served believing that duty and love were irreconcilable opposites, that to choose one meant abandoning the other. But standing here now, seeing what memory and faith can resurrect, I wonder, what if love is not the enemy of duty, but its highest and most perfect expression? Seraphiel moved closer, their wings almost touching, creating aurora patterns that painted the grove in lights of indescribable beauty. The question is not whether we have the right to love, but whether creation itself is somehow diminished when love is denied, when the greatest hearts are forced to choose between service and the emotions that make service meaningful. The Guardians exchanged uncertain glances. Their ancient mandate to maintain cosmic stability was being challenged not by rebellion or chaos, but by a love so pure and profound that it seemed to enhance rather than threaten the fundamental order of existence. Dr. Miriam Cohen, working from instinct and faith rather than academic training, found herself speaking with the authority of truth. In every great love story throughout human history, love doesn't weaken the lovers, it makes them stronger, more capable, more willing to sacrifice for something greater than themselves. Why would divine love be any different? Michael extended his hand toward Seraphiel, and as their fingers touched, light exploded from the contact, not the harsh, blinding light of battle or judgment, but the warm, golden light of dawn after the darkest night, the light of hope fulfilled and love restored. I choose love, Michael declared, his voice echoing through every dimension of existence. Not as abandonment of duty, but as its fulfillment. Not as weakness, but as the source of strength I never knew I possessed. Let all creation judge whether a commander who fights from love is mightier than one who fights from obligation alone. As he spoke these words, his armor began to change, incorporating elements that reflected his completed nature. Patterns that spoke of both warfare and tenderness. Strength that was enhanced rather than diminished by love. Authority that came not from lonely sacrifice, but from a heart filled with purpose and joy. The lead guardian stepped forward, and to everyone's amazement, he bowed deeply. Perhaps, he said with the wisdom of ages, the greatest secret we have guarded was not the truth of your love, but the truth that love and duty need not be enemies. Perhaps the order of creation is strengthened, not weakened, when its greatest defender fights not from loneliness but from the fullness of a heart that knows love. As Michael and Seraphiel embraced, their wings intertwining in patterns of impossible beauty, the grove filled with music so magnificent that the research team wept without understanding why. The music seemed to contain every love song ever written, every vow ever spoken, every heart that had ever found its perfect match. The scrolls in Sarah's hands dissolved into particles of pure light that swirled around the reunited lovers before spiraling upward, carrying their story back to every corner of creation, ensuring that their love would never again face the threat of erasure. "What happens now?" David asked, his voice filled with wonder at having witnessed the impossible. Michael, his arm around Seraphiel, smiled for the first time in 6,000 years, a smile that seemed to heal wounds throughout creation. "Now we discover what the universe looks like when its greatest protector fights not from loneliness and duty alone, but from love that makes duty a joy rather than a burden." Seraphiel added, her voice harmonizing with his in perfect accord. "Now we learn whether love truly makes all things new, whether the cosmic order is enhanced when those who serve do so, not from obligation, but from hearts that understand the full spectrum of divine emotion." The grove began to fade gradually, returning the team to their laboratory, but the change in reality was permanent and profound. The story of Michael and Seraphiel would ripple through both heavenly and earthly realms, challenging every assumption about the nature of divine love and the relationship between duty and personal fulfillment. As the vision ended and the laboratory returned to normal temperature, the team realized they possessed not just an archaeological discovery, but living proof that love, true, profound, sacrificial love, can resurrect the impossible, bridge any gap, heal any wound, and transform even the mightiest warriors into something far greater than they ever imagined possible. Father Romano, his understanding of divine love forever expanded by what he had witnessed, whispered a prayer of gratitude for being allowed to see the face of God, revealed in the love between two beings who had chosen each other across the barriers of time, duty, and cosmic law. Dr. Cohen carefully documented every detail of their experience, knowing that this story was too important to ever be lost again, too powerful to be suppressed by those who feared its implications. David backed up all their files in multiple secure locations, ensuring that this testament to love's triumph over erasure would be preserved for future generations, who might need proof that the greatest victories are not won by swords or armies, but by hearts brave enough to love against impossible odds. And Sarah, looking out at the Jerusalem skyline now bathed in natural sunrise, understood that they had been privileged to witness the greatest archaeological discovery in human history, not the finding of ancient artifacts, but the resurrection of a love story that proved the deepest truths about the nature of existence itself. Somewhere, in the space between heaven and earth, an archangel and a seraph walked hand in wing, proving that the greatest mysteries are not those that remain hidden, but those that reveal themselves to hearts willing to believe in the transformative power of love. The secret of Michael's past had been revealed, but the greater mystery, the infinite capacity of love to reshape reality itself, was just beginning to unfold in ways that would echo throughout eternity.